A very warm welcome to all our attendees to the SOS Children's Villages webinar, Ukraine 1 Year On. As ever with these kinds of events, I've got a couple of housekeeping rules to begin with. First of all our attendees are on mute, which I demonstrated just now how to do that. So please, if you have any questions for our two guests, type them into the chat function and we'll present those back to our guests towards the end of the session. Secondly, we're recording this event and I hope that we're able to edit the bit where I'm on mute for most of it. And we'll make that link available to the attendees as well for you to review at your leisure. And finally, these webinars are a really important way for us to connect with you, our donors and our other stakeholders. If you've got feedback for us, we'd be delighted to hear it. And to that end, there'll be an evaluation form, which will come up on your screen automatically at the end of the event. So thank you very much. So let's get into what we were going to talk about today. It is a year since the war began in Ukraine. And this is not a year later where any of us expect it to be, and certainly not where any of us want to be. And it's clearer than ever that the support needs of those impacted in Ukraine and on the borders with Ukraine continue to be critical, and indeed will be for many years to come. I just wanted to give you some facts about where we are at the moment in Ukraine. We estimate 17.7 million people are in need. More than 6.5 million people are internally displaced, of whom almost 1 in 5 are children below the age of 17. Clearly, in this kind of environment, there's a looming mental health crisis for children and young people, with an estimated 1.5 million at risk of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other mental conditions from having lived for 12 months in this appalling set of insecure circumstances. And we believe around 3.7 million adults and children need protection from and a response to violence and neglect. As society is breaking down and under enormous stress, this often comes out in gender-based violence and domestic violence as well. So these numbers are staggering. So we thought we wanted to talk to you about how SOS Children's Villages has been working tirelessly over the last 12 months to expand to this enormous emergency, and how our response programs have met some of these urgent needs and reached some of those in the most appalling circumstances. So I'm delighted to be joined, absolutely thrilled to be joined by two of the key people working on the emergency response program in Ukraine. The first of those is Irma Hajro, who's program manager working specifically on the emergency response for SOS Children's Villages International. She's been working with the response team for over 14 years, comes with a huge amount of experience and expertise, including a very personal affinity to the work that she's doing. She's going to share with us the impact that you have helped bring about through your very generous support and how we've been able to respond to the crisis. And the second of our guests, again, enormously privileged to have him join us today, Serhii Lukashov. Now, he's the National Director of SOS Children's Villages in Ukraine, and he's been working with the organization since 2019. And he's going to be part of the Q&A session towards the end of our webinar today, and he'll be able to give first-hand accounts of the work that he's been doing and what things are like in Ukraine literally today. So thank you very much for your huge support so far. This has been part of SOS Children's Villages' own fundraising and resource mobilization global appeal around the world. An enormous sum of money has been raised from all of those who support the work that we do, around 41 million euros altogether. We've been able to contribute to the work that Irma and Serhii are doing in Ukraine. So thank you, thank you, thank you for your support. But I'm delighted to be able to start this morning with a recording of an interview Irma and I had a couple of weeks ago, shortly before Irma was due to travel to Ukraine. So this will help, I think, give you some of the background, both to the work that she does and the impact that we've been having in Ukraine before we go to our Q&A with our two guests. Thank you. Irma, I wonder if we could get started today by you just telling me a little bit about your role at SOS Children's Villages.
Yes, so my role is I'm a program manager for the federation-wide response to the war in Ukraine. As you know, when we started to respond to the war in Ukraine in March in 2022, we have realized that we just needed a stronger structure, a bigger structure in terms of filling in all the expertise for the proper humanitarian response and a really wide and broad humanitarian response that was shaping up in Ukraine and in many other neighboring countries. So we have set up a structure of technical experts within our team, and on top of that, as you know, linking the technical experts with advocacy, with the international communications efforts, just as well as aligning it with a strategy and linking it to fundraising. This is where my role came into play, so to speak, to combine all of that to really bring all our very important elements internationally, regionally, fundraising elements, communications with everything what is happening in the field, to connect it closer and to make a humanitarian response that is fitting the needs of our program participants.
And it's extraordinary, actually, what's been achieved in the past 12 months. I don't think any of us expected to still be here in 12 months' time. I don't think any of us expected what has subsequently unfolded from the initial invasion, given SOS Children's Villages is actually all about longer term care, stable family life, access to good education. This isn't in our DNA to have to do this kind of work, and yet it's kind of been thrust upon SOS Children's Villages in Ukraine. Can you give us a kind of brief oversight of the current situation as you know it in Ukraine?
Yeah, I think what really helped all of us, and specifically SOS Ukraine, is the fact that in the core of our DNA is the care for children, is the child protection, which becomes even more so important in humanitarian action. Where we actually have to take care of already vulnerable children who are now again exposed to even a more higher, in this case, a war, most horrible vulnerability. So in that regard, we had the right motivation, and we really worked hard last year to bring all the tools to see where the conflict is sort of pushing people to try to assess the needs of these people, as I said, not only in Ukraine and also outside of the Ukraine. But what our staff in SOS Ukraine did was an amazing job. I mean, being able to somehow go from a team that has worked on 6 program locations in 2 regions to working on 20 locations in 13 regions, because they have acknowledged the needs of their people. And they have shown such a civil courage that I think we see that a lot in war situations, but it is amazing to observe it from where we are all standing, that they have explored all options to reach all the regions, to reach out to all the people, and they have really found a solution to each and every need that they have stumbled upon. I think this is really extremely important. And as I said, I think just juxtaposing the fact that we had in 2021 around or a little bit more than 1,000 beneficiaries, and that in 2022 this entire team that was affected, they were themselves affected, their families are affected, not were, they're still affected, that they fought through the situation, that they sort of fought this battle professionally but also privately, and they have managed in 2022 to reach out 125 beneficiaries. It's an enormous number. It's an enormous number.
Yeah.
Yes, they did their best also to meet the resources needed to build their capacities, which, as you can imagine, is extremely difficult in war zones and in wartime. But they did an amazing job. As I said, I'm blessed to be witnessing everything that they have managed to do since the March. Actually, not even since the March, because I think this is a little known fact, although I think Serhii mentioned it a few times. End of January 2022, I and another colleague of mine had a worrisome meeting with Serhii and his colleague Hannah, who said that the media hate speech was overburdening, and that they understood that something is cooking, so to speak, and that there was a real tension in the air. And they were scared for the foster families that were in their care, for the families, for the children. And they just wanted to inquire if there is a possibility that they somehow preventively act in protecting these families and children, to evacuate them into safer areas. And safer areas in Ukraine means closer to the Polish and Slovak border, right? And of course, we immediately said, you have to trust our member associations. They know the situation best. They know their program participants best. And that we finished everything in 2 days, and the families were evacuated. And 2 weeks after, you know what happened. That was in the nick of time. And from where we are standing now today, I think that that is one of the moments we can really, really celebrate, because it was an amazing prevention move. So I could say that they started doing their best already back then, and then regrouped in April and May, trying to, because many of our own staff became internally displaced people, regrouped again, found each other again, started working as a team. There was this beautiful story that even when they didn't know where everybody was, they had daily jour fixes, and they told everybody they have to put the camera on just to see that everybody's there, that everybody's alive, to ask them where you are, where they are, how you are. And there was a lot of crying at the beginning, and I thought this was, it was very, very amazing, everything what they have been through, and what they managed to do at the same time.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you could join us for this. I do recall in some of the very early meetings, like you say, 10 to 12 months ago, Serhii was taking some of the calls in his car. He was on the way to visit a particular family or a particular program. Another member of the team was just a black square on the screen because she had no electricity in her flat. It really was sudden and overwhelming, and just the most extraordinary set of circumstances which the team have had to meet, and the challenge they've risen to. So can you tell us about some of the programs and some of the activities which the team have now been able to undertake with the support of many of the people, of course, who are watching this call, the kinds of things they've had to do and they've ended up doing to support families and children?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, the foster families and children that were in our care, they were safely evacuated eventually to Poland. But SOS Ukraine opened up their door, and they have offered their support and their knowledge and experience to many other families that were in need. I mean, not to go into details, but of course the focus is on foster families, still on the on the foster families who newly adopted children, or on the kinship families. The focus was now in the war, a new target group, of course, families with injured children, families who lost a child, also injured children themselves, traumatized children. So you could see that they have really acted, they have found a niche where their experience and their connections and their networking could help communities. In that regard, of course, we had to slightly change from our regular programs, because the focus, of course, in Ukraine before the war was alternative care, family strengthening program, a very comprehensive case management, and humanitarian response seeks different type of solutions. So what I can tell you is that we have learned in 2022 that a preferred modality of SOS Ukraine and in general children's villages is a cash and voucher assistance. I'm mentioning that because I have a feeling that I'm not promoting it enough, and that donors, for example, usually look for ways to see distribution either of food or non-food items. And again, speaking from a very personal perspective, and understanding how cash modality works, I see so much dignity there that both parents and children can gain by having the financial control over something that is an aid, but doesn't feel entirely as an aid. And of course, it gives you the opportunity, it gives a parent an opportunity, even if they are unemployed and they're displaced, to still be that strong figure, financially independent for a child, for a family. So I think this is extremely important. However, we still do food distribution and non-food items distribution. The non-food items I might be calling NFI in the course of my talk. We are still conducting that in the east, so closer to the front lines, because as you know, the power restrictions there are very long. The banks are not functional, the supermarkets are not functional. So actually the only way for us to help families and children there is to distribute the food packages, is to distribute NFI packages, etc. We are doing partially the same distribution also in the so-called safer areas in the West, just because the cash and voucher system is not entirely enough for these families to live above a poverty line. So we are really trying to follow up the quality of our aid with the program participants themselves to see what can we do better, how can we do better. And one of that needs assessment resulted into a need to provide a little bit more additional support in, let's say, NFI packages or food staple packages, staple food packages, sorry. So that is quite important. That is widespread. It is, I have to say, it actually affects all our beneficiaries throughout Ukraine, throughout all the locations. The great focus in supporting people in Ukraine has always been, or since the very first conflict in 2015, it has been mental health and psychosocial support. Already in our initial needs assessment in 2019, SOS Ukraine informed us that there is a huge need to provide support to program participants and communities in mental health and psychosocial support. And that has now doubled. It really doubled now, of course, in 2022, and we see a great need there. Luckily, SOS Ukraine historically has an amazing experience in psychosocial support that they are now connecting with capacity building of our staff, of our implementing partner staff, in terms of identification and referrals, as well as in classical psychosocial support. We are also doing one-off MHPSS sessions. For example, we organize on certain locations with a classroom in a school, MHPSS session, which again, from a very personal perspective, I can confirm that this is an amazing move. It helps children in their age group to deal with things that bother them, and only to understand that it's actually the same fears and the same anxieties among the peers. I think it's a really, really successful method. Of course, if there is a need to follow that up, then that is being discussed with the school. They also do the child and war method. This is an acknowledged method in Ukraine that they have been doing before as well. It has proven to be an excellent method in working with children. So I have to say that in terms of MHPSS, the SOS Ukraine is really doing, is covering all the needs and in various, with various methods. And we are reaching many, many beneficiaries, and we're planning to reach even many more in 2023. Then, of course, a minor element of health, because as I mentioned previously, now there is many injured children, and they and their families, they need holistic assistance. So health in this case is not only covering for medical expenses, it really addresses the mental well-being of a child, the mental health of an entire family, the physical injury of a child, the rehabilitation. So it is in a way, it's a very holistic case management as well. And of course, there are minor elements of education emergencies. I just want to mention that this is not a classic education emergency in a sense of we are covering the gaps that a formal education system has. So it's not that we are providing, that we are schooling children, be that in a formal or informal way. It's rather that we are supporting children that are in our reach to attend formal schooling. So that is mainly material support, but also you could see our support in form of speech therapy and tutorials for children in child-friendly spaces, for example, which leads me to the last very important element of our response, and this is child-friendly spaces and mobile teams. As you know, the reach out of these two elements is amazing, and it's very important, specifically in a country that is so wide and so big as Ukraine. Mobile teams are extremely valuable, and child-friendly spaces are places where you can in such a, I use this word a lot, but so comprehensively actually help a family, because it's not only about working with the children, it's also analyzing what is the situation in a family, where the needs are, how can we be of help, can we be of help, if not, could we support with referrals, etc. So that have been the focus of an emergency response in 2022, and we will continue that in 23.
That's a huge range of activities, and I know that donors and supporters of SOS Children's Villages around the world have been enormously generous with all of this. And this, of course, is not just a
the immediate humanitarian response, which I think you have your eye to.
Mhm.
But if we think of children and families as the building block of our communities, and our communities as the building block of our nations and our countries, it's really important that they are kept stable and are maintained, in order that when the future comes and this conflict comes to an end, the country is in as good a position as possible to start rebuilding. And of course, the trauma which children and their families have faced, and trying to manage some of that even as it's happening, is so important. I know, we all hope in our hearts that this conflict reaches as swift a conclusion as possible. What is SOS Children's Villages Ukraine's view of the future? Kind of hard, and maybe I know we'll have Serhii with us when we speak live to everyone, and maybe this is a question for him as well, but what's your vision for what SOS Children's Ukraine can do to move the country through this and into, I guess, a phase of recovery ultimately, and what that might look like?
Absolutely. I mean, definitely Serhii will be better placed to talk about more detailed plans, but from where I'm standing, and again, speaking from my personal experience, during the war, the governments are really more focused on the defense of the country. So child protection, child safeguarding, they are on the lowest level of importance bar in any government, right? And believe it or not, the same happens after the war. After the war, it's actually about not defense, but it's more about building, rebuilding, and the government usually focuses on infrastructure. So what I have been talking to SOS Ukraine and Serhii and Daria quite a lot is that this is exactly where our momentum lies, because we have that driving force. We were the driving force for deinstitutionalization before the war. We already had an extremely well planned to, in a way, fight against a very negative DI reform that the government was implementing before the war. They were quite detrimental. They call it a reform, but in its effect, it was a setback with everything that the government was either deciding about the institutions, literally just renaming them, but not reprogramming the institutions, not fighting against the institutions. I mean, institutions are a business, right? So the government also follows the business. That's a little bit of a contradiction there. But also, for example, right before the war, the government was the one that suspended, they actually postponed suspension of placement of children that are younger than the age of 3 in institutional care, which is extremely detrimental. And this is everything that SOS Children's Villages, but specifically now SOS Ukraine, stands against. And where I see them is seizing this moment in the war. They're already doing this, but also after the war, to advocate for deinstitutionalization, for the right positive reform of the DI systems. And at the same time, we talked about this, that they don't just talk the talk, they will also walk the talk, because the idea is that right now we're already thinking about the plans that we could offer to the government by saying, if you follow these strategic approaches, this is what we as SOS Children's Villages Ukraine can offer, so that these children would be cared for. This is very crucial. It's very important. So Serhii could definitely talk a little bit more about these plans. But you see, in a bigger picture, I see SOS Ukraine as someone who the government will be building up. They will build back the country, and SOS Ukraine will have a really difficult role of building back a generation of children who have been severely affected by war, be that they have been born before the war, during the war, after the war. There are layers of traumas in these children, in these families, and I can't see a world in which SOS Ukraine is not really stepping up and somehow saving those generations so that someone would be able to be living in that reconstructed country. So this is somehow my really, really big picture. And I know that this is their driver and this is their motivation. And you could also see it from the way how we are planning our humanitarian response. There are a lot of thoughts there that are the way how we support children and families, it's actually the right path. There is that thread of deinstitutionalization that goes throughout. So they are, even in the worst of times, not stepping even an inch away from it, which I think is very, very remarkable. They're very strong on that idea.
I'm still in awe of Serhii and his team. I hope one day to meet them face to face. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
There are lots of organizations working in Ukraine, working to support Ukrainian people, including children. So what makes what SOS Children's Villages Ukraine does kind of different or particularly valuable in this situation?
So I think it is important to say that SOS Children's Villages is such that we are an organization that has a child at focus, and our regular programs are sustainable development, they're long-term programs. But what I have seen in the past 10 years of working for SOS in emergency is that the classical humanitarian aid doesn't leave a long-term positive effect on program participants. And I remember before, when we worked in other emergencies, we would also be very frustrated because we would be late a month or two with implementing our projects. But this is just because we always really thought holistically about a program participant, about a child, about a family. So it was never a matter of counting the numbers of food packages. It was rather a matter of what does this particular child need? What is the to understand how negatively affected the family is, and really to try to provide a plan where the support that you provide to a family would prevent this family from falling apart, from separating. The way how we do this humanitarian response is, in my opinion, a few steps before a child is in danger to an extent that it doesn't have a family anymore, that it has to be placed in alternative care, that it has to be placed in an institution, or etc., which I think this is absolutely the best zero step that we can do. So I can for sure tell you that though many organizations that have child protection at their core, of course, that we all implement all our projects with child protection, humanitarian action embedded throughout our sectors and activities. What differentiate SOS from other organizations are, in my opinion, three things from what I have observed. The fact that we have an enormous knowledge in case management, and we actually apply the case management in emergency situation as well, not in the same form as in regular programs, because it has to be tailored to the new needs of the program participant. So it is what I call emergency adapted case management. And then the second is family strengthening. We have an enormous experience there as well, but in regular programs. And now it's a matter of understanding the needs and treating those needs, or addressing those needs the same way we would address it as a family strengthening program. So for me, these are two approaches, two methods that we have taken from the regular programs and adapted it really amazingly into an emergency, or to fit it within the emergency to address the needs. And those two methods, because they are not in its own nature, they are not one-off support, they actually provide a little bit longer assistance to people in need. And a longer assistance to people in need, I mean, long, how to put it, long enough so it's not one-off, but also long enough so that you don't create dependency, which SOS also found an amazing solutions for that as well. Going at points where it's possible, even into the direction of income generating activities, even in an emergency or post-emergency. In my opinion, this is the type of a humanitarian aid that really helps someone to become more resilient for whatever other possible adverse effect may come in future. So it's like, as we say, build back better in terms of our infrastructure. That's also build back better, more resilient people, children, generations, because we will need it with the climate change. I think that we will see more emergencies, but this is exactly what I believe the type of a humanitarian response we should be providing. And I think it's very important for me to say that, because often people ask us about numbers. They ask us about the number of beneficiaries, measuring the impact solely by the number of beneficiaries. And as someone who has been also in the field and who has been working in this field for 10 years, I don't necessarily think it's fair, specifically if you do a comprehensive humanitarian response, if you do it through case management, and if you do it through family strengthening programs, then your unique beneficiaries are someone who receives multiple services per week, per day, per month. It's someone who you really follow through. So it's an entire family. And in a way, if I'm talking about 100,000 beneficiaries, what I'm not telling you is 1 million of services and people who need to conduct these services and people who need to make sure that these 100 beneficiaries have met a certain threshold of increasing the quality of their life. Because I think it's important. Often people sometimes when I present the numbers, they think that the numbers are either not high enough, but there is a story behind the numbers, and the story behind the numbers is multi-purpose cash, it's food distribution, NFI distribution, it's MHPSS sessions in 4 different methodologies, child-friendly spaces and mobile teams, etc., etc. So there's a variety of services, and I'm quite happy to see that even now, when you look back in 2022. The fact that we have managed to reach 125,000 beneficiaries throughout Ukraine and estimating 150,000 indirect beneficiaries. What an amazing number for not just those individuals, but also for the communities that they live in, that they serve. I think it's something that we need to tell a story a little bit differently in that regard.
And it's such an interesting point you pick up on, because that's something that we struggle with here at SOS Children's Villages UK. And so we can say X number of food packages, and that is not even the story. That's just the cost of those food packages, which you've talked about. It's a family which feels more capable of then going on and doing something else because they feel like they've got a reasonably sustainable source of meals for the next week. So someone can go and look for a job, or somebody can get their school books out, or somebody goes and plays with the next door neighbour because there's a little bit more certainty and stability in the family, and all of those knock-on and ripple effects start to rebuild communities, start to bring communities which have been shattered, starts to bring them back when people have a little bit more certainty, a little bit more confidence in the future. And that links back to something I think that you were saying earlier about the humanitarian response really being the beginning of the recovery and the beginning of the rebuilding. How you do your humanitarian response impacts on those other things, and it's about bringing the beneficiaries themselves and the communities themselves into a place where they feel they have a role to play in what those next steps are going to be as well, that's their responsibility. They will do it. They have the confidence to do it. My team hate hearing me talk about agency, giving people back that sense of, if I do something, I can assert some kind of control or influence over what happens next. That's so important in rebuilding communities, because for 12 months now, people have had the opposite of any sense of control, and that's traumatic, and that has the requirements for the psychosocial support intervention. So it's not just handing out food packages. It has to be, like you called it, holistic. There's whole people in whole communities, and it has to be a bit of everything in there.
I think that one of the reasons why I think we really have to be thoughtful about the risks that we are exposing ourselves in Ukraine, or exposing our staff in Ukraine, and organizing too many visits for not such a particular reasons, or for reasons that easily can be addressed by me and my team. When we actually have our monitoring visits, I do have a feeling that we are opening the door a little bit to a war safari. And unfortunately, I know that in the Balkans war, it happened, and it has extremely detrimental effect on the people at war, also after the war and during the war. So I think we have to be very, very conscious when we plan a visit. I'm not saying no visits, I'm just saying very consciously. We are, for example, now planning it as a group, in a group. It's a group effort, so that nobody, so to speak, waste time around accompanying us or organizing us. We have to be very, very conscious about others, specifically about others in this case.
Yeah, I think our donors would completely understand that. And that's again why I thank you so much for your time and to let me ask you these questions. I hope they weren't kind of too simplistic from your point of view. I'm extremely interested to hear more from you. So I hope sometime we get some more face-to-face time, or maybe you get to visit us in the UK. It's so important, and it's one of the things that SOS Children's Villages does so well, is these links and connections between all of these, otherwise independent organisations. We are effectively international colleagues under this one umbrella, and the communication lines are good, and the connections are good, and the working relationships are really, really strong. So again, a huge thank you to you for letting me question you this afternoon. Great pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I'm always very proud to talk about the amazing job and work that our people are doing in the field. Anytime. I also hope to meet all of you, and that we hopefully in peacetime can all go and visit any of our locations in Ukraine.
Here.
Irma, I'm just going to start by repeating my thanks for that, and thank you for spending your time with me earlier. So I know we did that shortly before you were due to visit Ukraine, and you relatively recently returned from that visit. Are you able to give us any updates on anything we heard there about what you saw or what you were doing?
Definitely, Alison. So again, I'm going to be repeating myself. Thank you for having me. I actually thought that these are the things that I probably very often talk about with Serhii, with another colleague who is supporting also SOS Ukraine. But then I think it is quite important to talk about everything that we are doing in terms of responding to humanitarian needs throughout Ukraine. What I can tell you is that we have traveled now visiting Serhii and our colleagues in the area of Lviv Oblast and even of Frankivsk Oblast. We stayed there for almost 5 days, but unfortunately we didn't have too much time to spend with our colleagues, because traveling there again takes at least 1 day away from your travels, right, from your agenda. But we were amazed. And I actually noticed also in this interview, I use amazing quite a lot, probably because English is not my mother tongue, and the lack of a better word to explain the amount of efforts that our colleagues in SOS Ukraine put into implementing such a huge, enormous project is beyond me. And seeing locations where we actually coordinate the activities, and then seeing locations where we partially take part with other partners like GTZ, like IOM, seeing those locations also, I can see whatever is actually in the power of SOS Children's Villages Ukraine. It has been raised to a really good quality threshold. So I was really, I didn't expect anything less, to be honest with you, but I was happy to see that. I was happy to see that quality of childcare and child protection, even in the worst of times, even in the times when that is really nobody's care. Seeing SOS Ukraine stepping up, ensuring that their program participants, that they have the feedback mechanism in place that is suitable for everyone, for every level of literacy or illiteracy, to see the child-friendly spaces, to see those children and to see the families and to see people who were registering for our support. That was crucial to understand if an activity is functioning or not. And coming from my own personal experience, back in those times when minimum standards didn't exist, when child protection, humanitarian action was not a thing, seeing all those gaps and how much non-existence of these things in the humanitarian aid can harm and further traumatize the child, and seeing, or literally not seeing those gaps now in Ukraine, I felt at peace. I felt so good. And I don't even think now, looking at Serhii, if I showed him or the staff enough gratitude for everything they were doing, that at some of the points I was even thinking, oh my God, we have so much to learn from them. What an amazing setup. And I think what I also want to point out is that the majority of our staff that are leading or coordinating locations are themselves internally displaced people. And there was one point which I also very much acknowledged, is that when they talk about program participants, they say there are certain things that people find difficult talking about, but themselves coming from that background or understanding those needs, they could anticipate the needs. They could lead the discussion in a non-harmful way to actually further analyze what the needs of the people are and really address it. And there were quite a few amazing things there. I don't know how much time we have, and also from the interview, I saw I can really talk a lot. My apologies to everybody.
It is just wonderful to have you here. So with that in mind, I'd really like to ask Serhii, who I believe, Serhii, you're in Kyiv right now. So what is it like there today? I mean, what is life like for you and your team right now?
Thanks to the Ukrainian government, army, society, and international solidarity, it is pretty all right here. And we are proud that Ukraine, with support of the whole Europe, whole international community, we never got dysfunctional. Internet, banking, public transportation, electricity, in most of cases, it was always working, always available. So we luckily didn't have such a disaster like hundreds of or thousands of people being hungry or being homeless. No. So we're extremely grateful for that. It wouldn't be possible without the international support and us. Thank you, Irma, for telling about our work. I really appreciate your positive assessment of us. We wouldn't be able to do what we did without that international support. So now in Kyiv, situation is all right. After the really hard winter, when we had the regular bombardments by the missiles, and the energy supply system was heavily damaged, and we had pretty cold and dark winter. But since a couple of weeks, it is much better. I have to add that due to international support of Federation of SOS Children's Villages, we were able to equip all our social centers, all our child-friendly spaces with electric generators, electric accumulators, the accumulator lamps. So our beneficiaries and our co-workers were pretty energetically autonomous, and they were continuing work even during the long blackouts. So now the blackouts are luckily over. I hope it is for a long time. We will see. The aggressor might start to bomb us again, but we are better prepared. So Kyiv is functioning pretty good, pretty normal. However, we are constantly in communication with our colleagues in the eastern and southern part. And I've been 2 weeks ago in the southern part of Ukraine, in Mykolaiv, where we work. And situation in that areas, which are heavily war affected, is much worse. And we now focus in our humanitarian efforts there to the east and south. In the central and western part, we are slowly moving from the humanitarian response to the more complex, more strategic support, to like thinking already, preparing already to the restoration, to normalization. But the east and west is still in real danger.
I think one of the things which has particularly impressed us here in the UK, well, me, I'll speak for all of the UK, is the resilience of the government and some of the government functions. How is it that you and your teams coordinate with the government, or do you have to get involved with coordination even with the military in some parts of Ukraine? How does that work?
Pretty well, and our government is quite open and transparent, and they know that we as society keep an eye on them, and we always control them. And our tradition of like pretty, how to say, we're quick to put them on place if they would not act in democratic way. So yes, we collaborate with governmental structures from the national level to the municipal level. We actually now are filling that gap, which Irma mentioned, that of course governmental resources are all focused on the military area, on the defense, while the needs of children and families with children and internally displaced people are, of course, well, not forgotten, but put on the far level of the attention. And this is where we, SOS and other our partners are stepping in, and we are actually covering a lot of the social services in the locations of our presence. And we are pretty much appreciated. We are collaborating in each regional, it is called coordination councils with the regional administrations, where all the charities, humanitarian organizations, childcare organizations are joining to coordinate efforts. We are members of all that these councils. We have official agreements, and now we are signing agreement with the Ministry of Social Policy, the main national body, which is coordinating social policy, because we are one of the main providers of the cash assistance and in general the childcare services. Again, there are many humanitarian organizations, but not many organizations who provide the complex care for children. And here we are, and this is why we have this special role in the current system of social services.
Yeah. I know, Irma, you were reflecting in our conversation about how humanitarian response has changed so much in recent years, and now children and women and even elderly people are more included and more considered during emergency response programming, and that's a lead role, I think, that SOS Children's Villages has been able to take in this, unfortunately, this particular emergency response in Ukraine. A quick reminder to our participants that, of course, if they've got questions for Serhii or Irma, please put those in the chat function, because I have one that has come through to us. It's a question about any particular help provided to families who have had to be split when the male member of the family has had to stay behind, and whether there's particular support aimed at female-headed households in that situation, because that's a particularly marked and unique aspect of this emergency response program. Serhii, is that for you, that question?
It is a whole range of services. First, we were providing, and still, unfortunately, we need to provide the very simple services, transportation from the war zone to the safe areas for mothers with children, when fathers mainly stay behind. They either in army or they stay in the war-affected cities to maintain the infrastructure, to keep system working. They normally don't leave their working places. So we transport and we provide, we assist in provision of the temporary accommodation. Then we have the whole complex of the adaptation in the new community, in the host community. We have our social centers, which are functioning as a child-friendly spaces, and the clubs for women, where they could get the psychological support, get the mutual support. They receive the material assistance in natural way and in a financial way. And as well, we are launching the program of the assistance in self-employment. Many of our beneficiaries lost their businesses, and they are able and they want to restore them in the new community, so we can assist them in that. Especially, we are focusing on the foster families and families with many children. They are accommodated often in the collective dormitories, collective facilities, which are, of course, not convenient for the groups with many children. So we provide them special financial assistance for renting a normal house or big apartment where they could live independently and preserve the good family atmosphere. So we provide this assistance as well. And of course, we are playing all roles of the mediators between the local community, local municipal authorities, and the newcomers, the internally displaced people. We organize different meetings, different events for local people and the internally displaced people coming together, enjoying, for example, food, or the celebration for children, or the more serious talks or community conferences. about the needs and issues. We are facilitating that. We are providing the material assistance to such meetings. So we are playing as well the intermediary role between the hosting community and the newcomers. As we are actually, as Irma mentioned, we are mainly newcomers ourselves. Many of our co-workers are as well internally displaced people. They lost their communities, their houses. They now helping others understanding what is it like.
That's extraordinary, isn't it, to think that the people who are delivering the support are themselves, you know, have some vulnerabilities and some need of their own.
Well, I can tell you whole stories. It might be adventure book of adventures. How brave were our people in the first months, how they were saving their children, and at the same time they were saving all children around, all families around. They were providing like services everywhere. They were stopping on that movement, and they were very dedicated, very brave people.
I am in awe of them. It's been incredible to see that from afar, let alone be there on the ground like the pair of you have been. SOS Children's Villages talks a lot about psychosocial support, and we like to use the jargon. We know what we're talking about a little bit there. It'd be really interesting to hear some more detail, I think, for our supporters on that, because again, that's a specialism, a support service that we provide, and again, that is something which people are much more aware of, the devastating mental health effects of this insecurity on people, not just now, but for any foundations for the future, for rebuilding as well. So what kinds of services are provided, and how many children are accessing those? No one for you, Serhii? Or?
I can answer, but maybe Irma wants to add something.
Maybe Serhii, you can start, and I can fill in any gaps.
Thank you.
I don't want to sound like scary, but indeed there is a minority of children who are extremely traumatized. Extremely, they saw the awful things. They lost their close relatives, their parents. They survived an extremely hard experience, and for those children, it is not that many. It is a couple of thousand of children, depends how we measure the severity of the trauma, who are under our support. And for them, we are providing the pretty expensive psychotherapeutical supervision. Our qualified psychologists working with them, and as well, we are providing for them a very interesting form of support. It is a children's camp, which is run by the team of the qualified psychologists who work with war-affected children since 2014 and have a lot of experience. And children are being placed to that camp for 2 weeks for the entertainment, communication, social integration, plus psychotherapy. In a form of play, children undergo the rehabilitation and treatment. However, much bigger group of our beneficiaries is children who didn't survive that bad experience, but they are for a year they are in a situation of anxiety, insecurity, uncertainty, and it is of course as well really bad and traumatic for them. So for them, we run the services like mobile teams, which were mentioned. Teams of psychologists come to the different villages, towns where the IDPs, internally displaced people, are placed, and conduct sessions in schools, in collective centers, in the parents' clubs, and provide for them interventions, the short but effective sessions, how to control the emotional status, how to support each other, how to maintain family relationships, and it works for children as well. Plus, we have the permanently working psychologists in our offices, where people and adults or children could come for the individual sessions. And as well, in our child-friendly spaces, we have the group activities for children, where they, again, play, entertain, but as well learn how to cope with themselves. And additionally, we have trained the municipal social workers how to support affected people, because the municipal services need a lot of the support in raising the capacity.
Again, a huge range of activities that you are providing. I know it has been wonderful for our donors and supporters to hear what you have been able to do and what you continue to do with their support. I could talk to you both for the rest of the day, and then I could start with you again tomorrow. But I'm afraid we actually now have to wrap this up. And again, a huge thank you from me, from SOS Children's Villages, from our donors and our supporters, to you both for the work that you do. For you both for joining us today. Irma, it's your second time talking to me. Serhii, I know your time is incredibly squeezed and you probably have to be in like 10 other places simultaneously right now. So we are very honoured to have had you join us today. I'm just going to remind our participants of a couple of things. This event is being recorded and we'll send you a link so that you can review at your leisure, and you can hear Irma and Serhii talk some more and remind yourselves of what they've had to say today, which has been incredibly moving, certainly for me as well. And again, remind you, an evaluation form will pop up on your screen at the close of the call. Please, we'd love to hear your feedback. That helps us think about how we can make sure you stay as connected as possible to the work that you so generously support. And on that note, we will leave by playing you a short video about our work in Ukraine. And it just remains for me to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you so much for your support for SOS Children's Villages in Ukraine. Thank you.
We will be saving as many children and as many groups, institutional groups of children, as possible.
I remember the time when we spoke with Serhii, we had this meeting and he said that the war has started. And then we said, okay, so whatever you need, we're ready. Just send the kids, send the families. The first hours, the first days were really crazy. All hands are on board. We are constantly involved in organizing transportation and location for families coming from Ukraine.
We're also thinking in the long term, or mid-term at least, to provide long-term assistance to the foster families and generally to Ukrainian kids. And that's why we're creating the network of SOS specialized centers, providing them with psychological assistance, psychotherapy, body therapy, rehabilitation, because that is what really they're desperately needing.
Наші плани на 2023 рік мене самого хвилюють, але й наснажують. 2023 рік буде роком відновлення, повернення якості життя, повернення самооцінки, повернення економічної самодостатності сімей. Ми довели, що принципи захисту права дитини на сімейне виховання можна втілювати, реалізовувати попри війну. Дитина повинна зростати в сім'ї, і ми спільно можемо це втілити в життя.